the UK column deals with a lot of people with very varied opinions, often very strong opinions, often people who are pushing against the mainstream and have a story to tell, and who might not get the ability or the freedom to tell that in, for example, the mainstream media. But we have a problem. Right? We've obviously got to pick who we go with and who we don't. So we've got to make judgments. And here's the problem. None of the labels mean anything. Someone comes to us and says, I'm a scientist. Right? Now, that could mean this is a person dedicated to the highest ethical standards, rigorous analysis, open and free debate, all in the name of the search for truth. Or it could mean that we're dealing with a science evangelist on the government payroll putting out the latest false religion. And we can't tell from the label. Someone might come and say, I'm a Christian, and we could be talking about someone who's a manifestation of the indwelling of the Holy Spirit and the love of Jesus Christ shines out of their face. Or we could be looking at someone who's using that label to give credence to a narrow, bitter personal view, or to deflect criticism that's in fact well earned. We don't know. The labels don't mean anything. So we have to look for something else. So there's several things we look for. One is, if someone is personally suffering because of what they're saying and continues to say it, we know at the very least that they're not lying. Right? They're telling what they consider to be the truth. They might be right, they might be wrong, but at least that's a very, very strong sign that they're honest. Passing a point out, this is one of the arguments for Christianity, because you had the apostles going to their death saying that Christ had defeated death, and none of them recanted. Right? They were all in. They meant what they said. Someone who suffers for what they say and continues to say it, we're always interested in that person. Secondly, there's a reason. There's always reason in what they say. Right? The people who are honest appreciate the difficulty in finding the truth, and they will reason out why they believe a certain thing. They will explain why they don't believe a certain narrative. There's always reason and reasonableness in what they say. Because the truth, they recognise the truth doesn't require a kind of bodyguard of snapping turtles to silence opposition. There are always reasons. And finally, sticking to it through suffering requires determination. Reason requires a dedication to truth and an unwillingness to compromise with half-truths and lies. But also there's a kind of gentleness. There's a gentleness and a tolerance for other opinions. And I don't mean the kind of the half-baked, I don't care what you think as long as it's a kind of philosophical 21st century mush that everyone else believes. Not that kind of tolerance, actual tolerance. Appreciation that people are going to have different views, and that's okay. And we can talk about that because the search for truth is complex and it's difficult, and it's something that the more people who are on that path, the better. So these three things, a kind of gentleness, a reason that permeates what they do, and a willingness to suffer and still carry on. These are the three things we look for. So, and it's these three things that led us to invite our guest today. It will delight many people. It may appall some of our audience as well. But we're very delighted to welcome the lovely Katie Hopkins.
Oh, thank you very much. That was a very kind introduction. And I think what should be said, importantly at the front end of this, is that your shirt is great. That we need to make a point that this shirt of yours is fabulous.
I do appreciate that, because I'll be frank here, the shirt has come in for some criticism.
Wow.
Not least of which from some of my colleagues.
Wow. You know, there are just people out there, my love, that just don't have our kind of taste. And all we can do is pity with them and sympathize. No, look, it's nice to see someone with a bit of brightly coloured going on. There's too much grey, there's too much standard blues. You know, we need a bit of pizzazz on our side, and you have it. And on the second point, I would like to say thank you for listening to anybody who might be a supporter or laughs along at me. And if you could stay, if you hate me, but if you would stay and listen anyway, that would be terrific, and I would be very appreciative. And I accept that you can't stand me. That's totally fine.
So I'd like to start with a little bit of your personal history, because I talked to you about people who stick to their guns even when it's costing them everything. And this is part of your history, and I think it informs a lot of what you do and say, and it's obviously very key to who you are today. So could you maybe just give us a little outline of how you became the Katie Hopkins of today? What's happened to you in the past for speaking, and
well,
what you think about that now?
People say, one of the questions I get asked a lot is, how on earth did you end up, like this? Like, how did you get like this? And I always think, what you mean, like a haggard old menopausal lady. But I guess I come at this from two sides. The first side is that I had a very standard upbringing, convent school, a very fortunate upbringing in terms of very traditional mum and dad. Went through school to college, found school easy, found exams easy, ended up, got my economics degree, came out of my university with the highest scoring economics degree, went to Sandhurst, went through the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, came out as one of 4 intelligent officers in the British Army. So standard. And then if I come at this from another point, it's that before lockdown and before COVID hit and before most people started to catch up to the idea that something very dark was going on, in that middle bit between leaving Sandhurst and the British Army and the lockdown bit, I'd had 20 years of learning what was coming. And as part of that, at one point, I was probably one of the best known media faces in the UK and certainly as well in America. Had my Daily Mail column, so Mail Online, global columnist, more read than Piers Morgan, most read on the Daily Mail, the biggest online newspaper. I had my LBC show in the heart of London, so a radio show most listened to, Sunday commercial show. So I was known on Fox News twice a week. I kind of was well known. And in order to stop me, in order to get me out, because I was never part of the club, I was never part of the protected racket that runs this country, and I was never welcome. And so in order to get rid of me from this audience, from the profile that I had, I was completely and utterly eviscerated from the face of the UK. And until recently had not spoken one word in the UK for about 5 years. And when I say eviscerated, just to give a very brief summary, first they came for my jobs. So that was my column and my radio and any other work. Trump tweeted me, so they took my PayPal. My bank accounts were closed down 10 years ago, and those of my daughter randomly. So banks, jobs first. Banks they took my next up was my home. So there was new law created just for me that says, if you today, or your listeners, one of your listeners that's listening now, if you believe you perceive that I have seriously harmed you today with my words, you can sue me tomorrow. And the idea is that you settle for £30,000 each time, blah, blah, blah. So that involved the selling of my family home and the getting rid of any possessions that I had. So I now own nothing. I don't have a bank account. I don't have a home. Then they came for my children. So my children were reported repeatedly to social services that I was abusive. My children, who were still relatively little, had to be interviewed independently to find out what I'd done to them. And so now none of my children have my name. I've never been near any of their schools, not one day in all of their lives. and I distance myself from my children in public so that they will be protected from me. And then a couple of jihadis, there's a news report, if people wanted to refer to it later, a couple of jihadis launched an attack on me. They wanted my head. And so a team of specialists turned up at my home one night to fit panic alarms and told me if anyone tries to come through the doors, I should shake the panic alarm. And then the British government, we could grab a screen grab of this, but the British government commissioned a play or part funded a play called The Assassination of Katie Hopkins. And those billboards went up around the country. And so I would say that is the way that I was removed and eviscerated. I'm still banned from all mainstream media. I'm banned from media in the States. And then as I have continued my work, I have been banned from South Africa by the ANC. And I'm also currently banned from Australia. So that has continued. But the glorious thing about these two sides of my life is that as we go into lockdown, as we go into the madness that we're descending into, I find myself perfectly free. And it's been such a blessing to me to own nothing, to have nothing, and to be frightened of nothing. And that's why I'm able to still do what I do. And I can do it with every freedom that it's possible to have. I'm very, very lucky.
It's when you put it like that, you're all that, and I followed your story and know the things you're talking about here. When you put it in that list, it's a deeply shocking list about how much they came after you, particularly the children, but all the rest of it. And it illustrates that you've been through a lot of the things that we've been reporting on, that the ordinary people up and down the country have had. We've reported on scenes and sometimes videoed scenes of people having their children seized, and it's heartbreaking. And the callousness with which the British police, social services, authorities treat people is beyond words in some way. It's deeply disturbing, and it comes from a society that is itself lost its way, clearly, that there's no sense of right and wrong. There's no sense of, hang on, I'm not doing that. That's evil. There's no sense of good and evil, for one thing. So all this came for you. I suppose my next question is, what did you say? What do you think was the trigger that unleashed all of that upon you?
Yes, and I'm fortunate to know. So there's two sides to this. One is it's a naive question. So when I was banned from Twitter 5 years ago, that was achieved via sort of coalition, if you will, of Rachel Riley. She's one to keep an eye on. The Muslim Council, the Board of Deputies, and a number of others worked together, went to Twitter HQ and had my account removed. So when people say, this is just about Twitter, well, what did you say? What was the tweet? It's a naive question because there wasn't one. It was a coalition of representatives who managed to have me eviscerated. And actually, interestingly, the same is very true of when this plan to, I think, I will always say truthfully, they will come for you until you swing from a tree. I absolutely believe the pressure is piled upon you until you remove yourself in the most final way because you cannot take it anymore. That day for me came when I was on the Mail Online and I refused to do what columnists do, which is sit in their houses and write stuff that's designed to attract attention or be controversial. So when people say, oh, you're a controversialist, I find that that's fine. I accept that. But I know me. And what I was actually doing at the Daily Mail was going to places to show truths that couldn't be argued with. So it didn't matter if it was me telling them. I was showing. I was stood on the shore in southern Italy in front of a Save the Children ferry, a rescue boat for migrants across the Med. I had spent 2 months there with a translator and a cameraman, and I had documents from the border police who knew who was coming, the time that these ferries, charity boats would arrive. I was working with all sorts of people. I knew when the Save the Children boat was going because they had a scheduled pickup with the Libyans in the Med. And it was reporting on that story. And the day that I was stood on the docks in southern Italy, that it was decided that I would be removed. And I saw it happen in real time because I worked directly with the editor of Mail Online, a guy called Martin Clark. If anybody knows what it's like to work with Martin Clark, it's not an easy relationship. And that day that report went in from me, great story, all factual, all first-hand reporting, it all descended. And if people out there still don't believe in the idea of a matrix or the idea of a very tight club, I can tell you it exists. I've seen it. So first up was the chief rabbi of the whole globe wanting a meeting with my editor, Martin Clark. Then it was Brendan Cox. People have always known that there's something about him. He was head of the Save the Children, or at least involved in Save the Children and Labour. There's a lot about Brendan Cox. He was involved, straight to my editor. The Labour Party were involved. The Board of Deputies had one of their letters with 53 signatures. The Guardian were involved. Someone inside the morning briefing at The Guardian got to me via text to warn me that The Guardian were sending all of their forces to have me removed from everything. And then Conservative Party members, the Catholic Church, they are all in. Charities, religious groups, powerful political leaders decide who gets to speak in this country and who does not. And on that day, everything started to go very dark very quickly. And that carried on for, a good sort of 3 years of evisceration.
Yes, wow. So immigration was the single defining point. I mean, this is an area I think in the UK column we've been very clear about the fact that it's a politically motivated process. Right? It's not about the individuals necessarily. It's about what is being done to our countries. We've reported Peter Sutherland, the deceased former EU, what was his title? BBC here calling him EU migration chief, which will be his formal title. But he was an Irish politician, part of the EU, non-executive chairman of Goldman Sachs International, former chairman of BP, heads the Global Forum on Migration and Development. He said that the EU should do its best to undermine the homogeneity of its member states. So this was policy. And although I think we've found this a difficult issue to talk about within the column, that aspect of it, the policy aspect of it, is one where we've found that it genuinely shocks people when they find out, no, this is not a conspiracy theory. They've talked about it. It's a conspiracy fact. This is what is being done to undermine our countries. So you went through all of this hammering to get you to the point of swinging from a tree, but you're not. You're here. So how did that happen?
Probably a lack of courage. It strikes me that people who are able to end their own lives have an extraordinary amount of courage to be able to do that. And it's one of the really troubling things to me that people who have this extraordinary courage aren't able to find that courage to be able to survive every day, which just goes to show how hard it gets. The noise becomes so all surrounding that you can't escape it. And that's why when I see people who commit suicide by drowning, you can understand it because you can feel how quiet that would be. And I'm bringing this at this personal level because I've definitely been here. And I totally understand Caroline Flack in the sense that an opportunity to escape the noise and make it all stop. And for me as a mother, so through all of this, so I have 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. The only way as a mother I could see to protect the children was to take myself away and end myself in order that I could allow them to have a chance not being besmirched by me. And that's how close it all really gets. And it is, strange enough, in those darkest moments where those are the one or two or three voices that somehow scoop in and hold on to you for a little bit. No one else knows. The world outside doesn't know. Your family don't know. Your friends don't know. Obviously, lovely Mark, my husband, knew, but him and two or three others who had no reason to be in touch with me right then scoop in and get you to just hold on. And that's always my message now with others. As soon as I see someone being eviscerated, I will always now tiptoe quietly in and ask them just to hold on, because that's what you have to do. You have to just, even if it involves lying on the floor, not moving, you just have to hold on. And of course, as it turns out, I'm so grateful now to still be around, because strangely enough, in a country where I was the most hated woman in the country, or the biggest bitch in Britain, as the Daily Mail had it later, or whatever, so many people have been so kind enough to listen now without the filter of mainstream and see a little of what I'm trying to do, maybe, and are kind enough to say, well, I hated you, and now I think I see what you're trying to get at. So it's been, I've been so lucky and so blessed to have support of so many brilliant people. And the other thing I wanted to just say about what you're talking about there is about the migration thing. It isn't at all personal. It is just policy. It is just policy. We are distracted by talking about slavery in the past. And we're distracted so that we talk about, reparations, must pay reparations for slavery, like it was something that happened before. The most profitable industry that there is the movement of human flesh. And I would argue that more flesh is being moved on a daily basis for profit than at any other time in history. And all roads lead to Rome. If you look at where that profit goes, it goes to the very people who are preaching about how terrible slavery was and why we should pay reparations. So just to reflect on that. But yeah, I consider myself now super lucky. And also, I think this segues slightly to where we're going later. But, because of certain other things in my life, the reason I had to leave the military way back when, I'm also on extra time in many different ways. I'm on extra time because I didn't end my life, and I'm on extra time because I had epilepsy and now I don't. So I am super lucky and super privileged to be so free to be able to continue speaking the same truths as I've been speaking for the last 20 years, despite being eviscerated.
Yeah, one of the stories we're covering in the last week and I've covered in the past is a footballer in Scotland called David Goodwillie, and he was accused of rape and the charges were dropped, and this was 12 years ago. He was taken to a civil trial, which bankrupted him. The civil trial found against him. And he's now got every politician, certainly every SNP politician, including quite a number of, including at least one convicted sex offender politician, dedicated to ending his football career. And he's had this for 12 years, and he spoke out, and he said, they'll keep at you until you're found swinging from a tree. And he's got a wife now and a family, and he's trying to rebuild his life, and they won't leave him alone. And eventually, after 12 years, he did an interview, started to speak out about this. And his current club was told, well, you got to get rid of him, or the council-owned ground you use won't be available to you. Right? And this is about, I think, the third or fourth time this has happened to him. And his current club said, do what you like. We've a responsibility to this man not to treat people like that, and we also have a responsibility to, to our staff not to be so essentially callous and disregard their welfare and mental well-being. And the fact that it's the same team who lecture us constantly on mental health, who are trying to drive people to this, is just one of the hypocrisies we have to deal with. You mentioned your epilepsy there, and the fact that it's no longer with you, and so this was this must have been. I can't imagine what this would have been like, but this was severe and lifelong, and then all of a sudden not. It must be fantastic.
It turns out life, if you're not an epileptic, is quite easy. It's quite manageable. Who knew? And so the reason I signed up to fight, or at least to fight for my country for 35 years in the intelligence corps. I had the longest contract of any female in the British Army at one time. I wanted to be the first female general. So that was my life all sorted. And then I was also epileptic, came on about 1920. I tried to hide it, which is incredibly dishonest. But I thought if I could prove that I was good enough and strong enough and fast enough, they would allow me to stay. In hindsight, an epileptic with seizures and a semi-automatic weapon may not have been, my finest 5 minutes. But anyway, so I was medically discharged at a later time from the army, the only job I ever wanted. And my seizures in my life, or I call them fits. You're supposed to call them seizures these days. Doesn't matter to me what you call them. And if I could just mention that I'm speaking specifically about myself here. I'm not talking about your son or your daughter or the person you know with epilepsy. But for me, epilepsy made me a freak. And you can understand why epileptic used to get burned as witches. I mean, it's why no one wants to talk about epilepsy, or no one wants to admit that they've got an epileptic child, for example, because it's so ugly and so weird and so otherworldly. And by the time I hit about 35, these seizures were out of control, always at night time, 3 or 4 seizures a night. They would dislocate one or both of my arms from their sockets. So they've been out of their sockets about 40 to 38 times each. Have to go to A&E, have arms relocated. I've taken off my tongue. I bit through my lips. I've knocked teeth out, the stuff. And so by 38, I was told by a surgeon, I just got in time, I don't know how, a brilliant surgeon, Mr. McAvoy, told me that a seizure would get me within the next 2 years. So that was at 38. So I had 2 years, but it might come sooner or at some point, And so I used to be on the road. I hid my epilepsy from everybody because I see it as a weakness. And I didn't want special treatment. And so I used to wake up on the road. I used to text my mum, still here. And I used to text lovely Mark, still here. And I think lovely Mark would be a bit like, shit, I can't kill her off. But so the seizures were supposed to get me. And then I was so lucky, just before lockdowns, before COVID, before health system fell apart, I waited 3.5 years. So a seizure was supposed to get me in 2 years, and I waited 3.5, and I got my surgery. And this surgery, I have never had a seizure since. So a team of, I think, 12, 14 hours. I don't have a top of my head anymore. There's people out there actually on the road who have felt my brain. I'm like a little egg, basically. So they took off my skull like this, and then they went in, they got out the kind of tumor lump, threw it away, and they threw away the top of my head, which was inconvenient in the sense that now I just have a brain hanging out. But I've never had another seizure, and I've gone on to have my arms rebuilt and started to rebuild my teeth. So it's been amazing. I couldn't be more grateful. I really am so grateful. Nearly every day I try to be grateful. And it also means that I'm on extra time. And it means that there is literally nothing that I'm scared of and nothing that I fear. I've already met the end point, and so that's why I know I'm unstoppable. And that's why I can do what I do now, is because there's nothing anyone can take from me, and I'm on extra time. So I just love this life. It's awesome.
You mentioned your arms, so this is another thing I want to have a chat about. because Katie's Arms is a thing. And I've watched Katie's Arms for a while, and for those who don't join you on it's Friday evening, isn't it?
Yes.
Tell us all about the Katie's Arms.
So I believe the key thing, one of the jobs that I have assigned to myself is to get people through, because I've done dastardly things, because I've been so humiliated. I've humiliated myself. I've misbehaved. I've been caught doing things that people are like, oh, how can she live through this? Terrible things. But my view is, look at me, look at the stuff ups, look at the mess, look how I've been humiliated on a global stage often. You know, the downfall of Katie Hopkins, the end of the bankruptcy of Katie Hopkins. Katie Hopkins gets the X award, and by X, it's a rude word that you would never want to be called. Humiliation after humiliation, always the worst pictures, you know, look how old she looks. Oh, so I say to people, you know, we can get through this. And I realized really early on, when you saw COVID, what was coming and the way the media play was going with this, what was going to happen, they were going to crucify people. And then I saw what happened inside the NHS before COVID was officially launched, and they terrified NHS workers. They were the key to spreading ultimate fear in the UK. It wasn't the mainstream media, it wasn't the newspapers, it was using NHS staff, because everybody trusted their sister who was a doctor or their uncle who was a whatever. And those guys were briefed that this was going to be a mass death scenario and you would have to make life and death choices. Anyway, I saw that I was going to need to step up to be able to help pull people through. So we created the online pub. I miss pubs of the old days. I miss going into the pub, and you know that the people noise, the noise of people being together. I miss smoking pubs. I don't know why we can't have smoking pubs still, where people, if they want to smoke, go and smoke. Why have we got to police how people choose to have a good time? Why have we got to try and reduce people's fun? We should be trying to maximize fun. Like the founding fathers in America, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. That was an actual thing. That is an actual foundation of America. America is the pursuit of happiness. So Katie's Arms is an online pub, like the King's Arms or the Queen's Arms. And then people would always talk about my arms because I've been grateful enough to be given a second chance and to get arms back. And so I work out a bit. And so it became an online pub. It's half an hour. It's live, and it's essentially me gossiping away like some silly woman in the pub. And I just dish the dirt. I have, gossip from BBC. I have gossip from media days. I have things people tell me that they want told, but they can't tell. And we just gossip away. And it's a bit mad. We drink away together. But I can't tell you the number of people after I do, when I'm on the road, people that come up. There's so much laughter, but then in the quiet time when I'm doing, I make sure I meet every member of the audience afterwards and thank them personally for coming. And there's so many tears. And people always say, or often say, sorry, Katie's Arms got me through lockdown. And I can't imagine that, because it's just silly me being silly. But people could look in the comments and the feed when I'm talking, people write all sorts of, some people write funny things. Some people write just hello from Southern California, hello from New Zealand, hello from all over the world. And people realize they're not alone, and this was the key that I repeat, and I'll always repeat, is you're not alone. We're many and we're stronger together. And Katie's Arms gave people at the time were told they were completely alone, and they were the ones in the wrong if they didn't do this, or they were mad if they didn't do this, or they were conspiracy theorists if they didn't believe in this, or that their family were right to disinvite them for a funeral, or they shouldn't be allowed to travel, Piers Morgan, or Andrew Neil, they shouldn't be allowed to access healthcare. At that time, there was at least somewhere they could go where people were like, do whatever you want, be whatever you want, we're just going to get through this together. And that's basically what we do. So yeah, it's been glorious. It's blown up. The numbers on it are blown up to the point where it slightly scares me, but I love it, and I'm so grateful to everybody that joins us. Yeah.
This is actually very similar to the column. The thing that we started to get once we got into COVID craziness, we've started to get emails to say, you keep us sane. It was the same phrase. It kept coming up over and over and over again. And this is, why are we getting this? But what you had was constant transmission of fear and guilt on all mainstream media sources 1,000 times a day. I mean, it was just unrelenting. And our news show had some folk talking honestly, and they were unafraid. And I think it wasn't any more complicated than that. It was real and it was unafraid, and that was enough. How many people go to Katie's Arms now then? What are the numbers like?
So we're about 250,000 now strong, which is bonkers. I don't like to talk about it because I like to be like, just me and a couple of others. So it's bigger than I guess most podcasts are, but I still don't want to talk about it because the numbers aren't the thing at all. But I think to your point there, it's that not only was it being pushed at the media level, media, that death count on the BBC and with or from and the COVID, and then all the scientists with their, endless. It wasn't so much even that, I think, that provided the surround sound. The hurt came from within. So it came from family members rejecting their own. And it also came from within in terms of friendships. So it didn't matter so much that people you always thought were a bit of a, I don't want to say arsehole on UK column, but people you always thought were a bit, it didn't matter about them. It's the people you genuinely thought were your friends. The people who you genuinely thought were, like you, in that you were like-minded, whatever. It was when they turned on you, you realized how alone you were. And that absolutely, I will maintain that was a mass injury event. Lockdown was a mass injury event, like a car crash or a train wreck. And yet there was no broken bones and no blood to be seen, but it was a mass injury event. And right now, out there, people are still carrying those injuries with them, like a big water bottle just here. And as soon as you tap it or lance it a bit, or you make a room full of people laugh, it's like the water tap turns on and this flood of upset comes out. And that is what people are, that's physically how I see people. When I see people, I see them almost carrying this weight of upset. And that, I think, was done to peoples all over this planet, absolutely deliberately, to set the ground for what's coming and is underway.
You mentioned laughter, right? Now, this is vitally important. Right? Now, UK column, we like mockery, right? We like laughter. We use music and we use comedy as much as we can because it's health. It's how you process the craziness in the world. It's how you overcome it. It's a wonderful cathartic thing. And we like people who commit to comedy. I mean, we like jokes, and we like jokes that go on and they get funnier as they go on. It's another reason, Katie, we like you, because committing to a joke, okay, is a good thing. Not many people have been deported from a country and for a joke gone and got the word deported tattooed on their arse, right, simply to laugh at the people who deported them, right? So firstly, thank you for doing that. And secondly, could you tell us a story, please?
It's funny because when I hear you saying it, I think, oh, that sounds ace. That sounds brilliant. And then I think, oh, wait a minute, that's me. So, yeah, I'll try and do it in brief because it can bang on this story. But essentially, Australia, lockdown, crucify Australia, and it was really dark there. I mean, it was dark here, but that place, you couldn't leave, you couldn't come back. People that had relatives dying, you weren't allowed to go back and see them. Mothers not able to return to small babies. I mean, it was mad. The level they went to, the cruelty, that's the word. And at that same time, in a parallel path, I got the call to say they were doing this terrible program called Celebrity Big Brother, which I've done before. And they wanted me in it. And I couldn't even, believe the hypocrisy. They wanted me to go there to do a TV show at a time when a mother could not see her own baby, or a son could not be with his mother as she died. And so I thought in my head, yeah, go on then. Let's do this. Let's see how far we take this. And it went all the way. It went all the way to me being on a plane, to me being taken from the plane by the police, to being put into quarantine prison. I mean, it was a very nice flat on the 23rd floor, to grown men briefing me on the rules. I must not touch the door. I'm not allowed a key. If I hear a fire alarm, stay in place. Sure. I'm not allowed to go out. I have to wait for my food to be delivered. I have to count 30 seconds before I'm allowed to go to the door and get my food delivered. I mean, plus they brought me into the country. I never had a vaccine in my life. So I was told to lay low. I was told to tell no one I was there. I was told to keep my mouth shut. I was told lots more rules. And I think we're getting the impression of me. I'm not great with rules. I don't like to be told what to do. And I think I've earned the right to just walk my own path. And so one morning when I heard another terrible story and I thought, okay, that's it. And so I went live, and bear in mind, everybody at this point's online because no one's allowed out. They weren't even allowed out. They weren't allowed to browse in the supermarket. There was no browsing rules. You had to keep your supermarket trolley going at a constant velocity. I mean, so I got online and I went for it, and I exposed that I was there, that I was put in a quarantine place, that I've taken the place of someone else who could have been here to see their relatives, that I've been brought over here for entertainment, that people need to stop obeying, people need to stop being compliant. And then I got into my flow, and then it was, you need to rise up against the tyranny of the people. You were a prison island, but why are you acting like one now? And I went full Churchill. And then on top of the cooker, I saw this oil, this vegetable oil. And I was like, you know what I'm going to do? The next time security knock on my door, and it's the military, it's the army bringing my food, I am going to get naked. I'm going to cover myself in vegetable oil, and I'm going to run down the 23rd floor, and I'm going to grab the member of the military, and then I'm going to drag him squealing like a pig into my room. And then I'm going to do, and I was acting this out, terrible things to him. And then the BBC, The Guardian, Al Jazeera, CNN ran that as actually having happened. Hopkins violates military on 23rd floor. My parents are Methodists. It didn't go well. I never left my hotel room. I never got naked, although I'm willing to at any time. And it went dark very, very quick. My water was turned off. The electricity was turned off. The food couldn't be delivered because there was a poisoning attempt. Immigration were involved. They rang me on the hour, every hour for 48 hours. And then eventually 2 van loads of migration police officers, I don't know, turned up in full hazmat gear with breathing apparatus to take me to the airport where they had the press waiting, obviously. And then they put me on a plane and they deported my ass back to the UK. And they banned me for 3 years, and they fined me $1,000 for violating a member of the military on the 23rd floor.
I don't know what to say.
I've got
to
something
that.
better. This may need to be edited out, depending on how. I'm going to try and do the unthinkable. There. That's the deported stamp on my arse. So I got my arse out on UK column, just for the record.
Well, for the record, the introduction compared you to one of the 12 apostles, and you showed your arse on UK Column. That
It's a
covers
whole
a
New
fair
Testament, darling.
range in one interview.
Yeah. This is a whole new religion we've got going on here. So I had that done, and then I was popped up in Arizona, which was somewhere else I wasn't allowed to be, and the tattoo bar was called Leap of Faith, and I love that because I tell my daughters, like, leap. It's a true story. Leap and your wings will unfurl, right? So I go in there with my passport and I say to the guy, I want this on my arse. And he was a Trump supporter. So it was, we had a great time. But then I sent a picture of my arse to the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, who deported me in the first place. It's a good story, but it's a true one.
So this takes us to comedy tours, right? So you are currently, when you're not being cancelled, touring the UK, and your show is called Live, Laugh, Love. Is this right? And how is the tour going?
So the last tour, which is finished now, was called Live, Laugh, Love. And it was a terrific risk. I don't know if anyone's ever considered doing stand-up, but if you consider it even for 10 seconds, you say, no way.
No way.
Exactly, no way. Even if you're a speaker, even if you're used to cameras, even if you're a writer, you'll say no way. But I did one show. After 5 years of not being allowed to speak anywhere in the UK, a gentleman called Alex Belfield, I had been watching some of my stuff, thought I could do equivalent of stand-up, thought I was funny, and asked me to do his Blackpool show with him. And so he added my name, and then all of a sudden we sold out Blackpool 3 times over, and it was the highest grossing show in their modern history. It is still. So 4,000 people in one weekend. And that was the start of it. And so I started the Live, Laugh, Love tour, and that went so brilliantly. I will say very clearly, it is not without its heartbreak still. After Blackpool, every theatre wanted in on it. They all wanted a piece of that money because they saw that no one was selling tickets like that. And then one by one, the left, the Matrix, the mob got to these venues, and I lost 30 venues. So 30 theatres pulled on the basis of one person or two people showing them some old tweets or saying that I was a hater or that I was an Islamophobe, whatever, it doesn't matter the labels. So, and I'm still absolutely battling that now. We just lost 2 theatres last week, Port Talbot and another one. Yeah, the name escapes me. So in terms of your football story the other day, and in terms of me talking about the cancelling and being so positive and optimistic, it's still every single day, given the opportunity, someone will assert their place on the moral high ground by having me removed. But what's been amazing is that when places hold, we will sell out. So the new tour, and it's kind of you to ask, thank you, is coming out in the next week or so. Lovely Mark has got the tour dates lined up. It's going to be called Infectious. So it's the Infectious tour, as in laughter, not some fake disease. So the Infectious tour, it starts at the end of August. It will run through November. We're already sold out in, I think, 3 or 4 venues. This is the problem I have. I can't get enough venues. I can't get enough tickets because all people want to do is come and laugh and feel better. And that's what we do. And my favorite thing of all, if I may, just very quickly about this tour and Live, Laugh, Love, is that, so at Blackpool in particular, we got a call from the managers because they've been amazing, but we've got to keep an eye. And they rang because they were concerned because there were so many individual tickets being sold. And we were all concerned that maybe it was a group that were buying separately, might meet up there, try to cause trouble, harm someone, these idiots, they're pathetic. But it turned out it was just because our people are alone. And because of what we're offering, which is a place you can just come and you'll immediately be one of the family. It doesn't matter whether you're black, white, straight, gay, whatever it doesn't even matter. You can come on your own and you belong. And that's the glorious thing. Everywhere I go, a lot of the tickets that are sold, far more than any normal event, are individuals who come without their wives or without their husbands or without their family because they've been isolated. And it's so uplifting and I love it so much. And it stresses me out because it's terrifying, but it's just great to laugh together. And, I was mentioning this the other day, but I'm not supposed to be funny. I'm an intelligence corps officer in the army. That's my heart. But in the time of the courts and the kings, the only person who could speak truth to power was the jester. And I guess that's why there's this new iteration of myself, is that the way that I can not be censored to the same extent is to be funny, even though at my core, my message is still exactly the same as it always was.
It is striking that in Scripture, when it talks about the end times, about the worst times that there will ever be, and it talks about how the Christians react during this, they'll laugh. They'll look at all the persecution. They'll look at everything that's coming their way, and they'll laugh. Laughter is a wonderful thing. You mentioned Alex Belfield. I was appalled at every aspect of the Alex Belfield case. Now, you obviously know him. Can you say a little bit, just briefly, what happened to him, and could you maybe let us know how he's doing?
Sure. So my first contact with Alex was when he kindly asked me to share his stage in Blackpool, and bear in mind, all these other people with stages and platforms had never asked me. And I don't mean that any of them had to. It was just what a generous thing to share that space and take a risk on me. So we did that together, and we did another series of events 6 months later. But all the while, there was this kind of thing going on in his background where he'd been doing videos on his YouTube channel about Jeremy Vine, about the BBC. I think at some point, and I don't know the detail, and I don't frankly need to, there was times when he'd emailed extensively to Jeremy Vine and others. It was considered harassment or whatever. And so cases were brought against Alex to do with this kind of harassment or the idea of stalking. All I knew was that Alex from the stage and Alex that had these legal problems going on, particularly the BBC coming for him, strip searching him, going into his home, taking away all his tech and hardware, not finding anything, but still coming for him, and me understanding a bit what that's like. And then he went to court eventually for this case of stalking that was brought by members of the BBC and Jeremy Vine in particular. And Jeremy Vine was in court and he cried and said he was so frightened for his life that he'd had to show Alex's pictures to his daughters because he was frightened that what Alex would do. Now, I don't know if any of you out there who are listening have met Alex, but I can say of all the people that I may have been frightened of in my life, Alex Belfield is probably the least frightening one. Like the idea of Alex Belfield as frightening when he's just this outrageously ginger guy who's slightly camp and wears really tragic jackets. That's about the limit of Alex Belfield. But anyway, and I don't go into the detail of what went on emails. I can say for a fact, Alex Belfield never, ever showed up at anyone's door. He never, ever threatened anyone physically in the street, and he never, ever threatened anyone that he would come and find them in the streets. And for his crime of, I think, applying pressure to the BBC where they didn't want it, he was sentenced. So I was on stage with him on the weekend, and I was saying, no, you won't get it. It's going to be fine. And I thought maybe they'll give him a suspended sentence, or maybe they'll take him down, keep him for 2 days, release him just so they can get the press pictures, which is kind of standard. But they sent him down for 5.5 years for online stalking. And again, just like with me, this was a new law created just for Alex that created the precedent that you could have jail time for online stalking. And as with me, this all seemed to be written up. No matter what was said, no matter what happened in the court, this all seemed to be decided in advance. So he will serve 2.5 years inside. I speak to him about twice a week. I spoke to him probably about 3 days ago. And, I try and think beforehand about the things I might talk about. How can I talk about something that helps him but isn't too interesting? How do I not say I've been doing anything too exciting, but also have fresh things for him to think about, so that I'm trying to be helpful, and it's hard to know how to be helpful. And so I just keep telling him about holding on, different stories about, just hold on, because whatever happens, time is ticking. And he said that inside there's a saying, which is they can turn the locks, but they can't turn the clocks. And I just think that's the most perfect thing, because even in your worst days or hours or minutes inside, and what do I know about that other than nearly having gone, the clock is still ticking. And so that's key. That's my message that I just repeat over and over. You just got to get to tomorrow. You just got to get to this afternoon. You just got to get to this evening. And so he reads people's emails. He reads people's letters. He sends them on to his mum so that she can also see he's got support, but he is serving 5.5 years for the crime of making some videos and posting them on YouTube.
It is a stunning case. I was astonished. I mean, there's a clue sometimes when you see the sentence, and it just says, well, that's simply there to silence and intimidate, and there's no hint of justice about that. It was one of those. I've seen it before in the Hampstead case, and actually, I'm sitting here because of visiting a man in jail who was locked up for the crime of talking about something called the Violate Club, which is a fetish club organised by an Airdrie lawyer, which is frequented by some of the great and good in Scotland. And they use, amongst other things, child-sized dolls in sexual activity. And he was talking about this, and he'd previously campaigned for a girl up in Aberdeen called Holly Gregg. Man's name was Robert Green. And he stood for Parliament as part of that campaign, and was banned from the city in which he was standing for Parliament. And he was arrested and then banned from the city. He was subsequently convicted of breach of the peace. He was given a year. He got let out. He was still campaigning and writing, and he wrote about the Violate Club. And Police Scotland came down all the way to Cheshire to lift him. And the only thing they wanted on the way back up was to talk about what he knew about the Violate Club, and was he going to release the membership list. So I started visiting Robert Green inside, and it was very strange because everyone in the prison knew that he was in for campaigning against child sexual abuse. So he was a hero. We would go in, and there would be such laughter in these visits. I'm sure all the wardens go, this is just not normal, why is he so cheerful? And one day I'd been at either a wedding or a funeral, I can't remember, and I was all dressed up in my kilted finery. And I thought, well, I'm seeing Robert in the jail tonight. I suppose I should change. I thought, no, stuff it. He's a special prisoner. He's a special person. I'm going like this. So I turned up in a kilt, and as you go in to visit, you get patted down, you get frisked, and there's 2 lines, one for men, one for women. So I looked at these wardens and said, which line do you want me in? And they kind of smiled and pointed at the bloke's line. They'd obviously never patted down anyone in a kilt before, so there was a bit of awkwardness, and then I went. And Robert thought this was an absolute hoot, me turning up like this. But he got strip searched that night because he just did. But it's for me, this started visiting someone in jail, and someone in jail for telling the truth. And the sheriff that he named in the Holly Gregg case is still on the bench in Aberdeen, still serving. And
Police Scotland are a really special breed. You know, there's some police forces, as we head towards the darkness, or as we hurtle towards the darkness, there's some police forces, you know, I could write down now the police forces that we'll hear from about first, if truth ever came out, or in my lifetime. So Police Scotland, 100% there. West Midlands Police, they're, you know, if truth ever came out, them, because they're the ones, Police Scotland are the ones that came leaping to get me whenever I said something that was truth, but you're not allowed to say, because in an age where truth becomes hate speech, telling facts is an arrestable offence, of which I've fallen foul on more than one occasion, thanks to Police Scotland. Police Scotland threatened to repatriate me from Australia at Christmas because of a tweet. They love a headline, those guys. And same with West Midlands Police, the heart of darkness, West Midlands Police, in my personal opinion. And I've reason to believe that. So, well, all good love to him. And I'm glad he's managing to stay sane. I think when you're imprisoned from the truth, actually, it was an interesting story. I was looking for it earlier, but the gentleman that was released yesterday on the steps of the courts of appeal, he's done 17 years for a rape he didn't commit. And he had to serve, it was a life sentence he was given. This was Manchester police that put him inside. He was given a life sentence of which he would serve 7 years. And he served those 7, and he was given the opportunity to be freed if he would acknowledge his guilt, and he refused. And because he refused, he was given 10 more years inside, and they've just got him out on the Court of Appeal. And I'm very drawn to that story because he held his truth, even though every minute of those 10 years he paid the price. And the juxtaposition for me is a lot of the January 6th individuals that I know well that were imprisoned and are in prison. They pled guilty as part of their plea deal to get a lesser sentence. And many of them have a great deal of regret about that. When asked what they regret the plea deal, they regret pleading guilty. And some now are actually going back to court to ask for their guilty to be overturned because they made it under duress. They were trying to save maybe their wife or their kids or whatever that they were told would be, you know, got at. And I just think that's an interesting thing for your listeners is, at what price do you acknowledge you did something when you didn't? You know, and at what price to maintain your innocence? And when people say, well, of course I would just keep saying I was innocent, but would you? If you were pushed, would you? What if they were going to take away your holidays? I mean, that was enough for people to get the vaccine, wasn't it? What if they were going to take away, you know, your right to travel? Well, that was enough for some people. What if, you know, when the pressure really comes is when you find out what you would be prepared to go through, I think.
Yeah, one of the lessons I've had to learn in this is that innocent people plead guilty all the time. And when you see the pressure that they're under, I absolutely understand why.
Exactly.
Partly it's the legal profession. Partly the legal profession's responsible for this, because the legal profession will say, here's your state-appointed defender, and the state-appointed defender will say, look, there's no chance here, you're definitely going to be found guilty. The only thing you can do to help yourself, right, because the guilty verdict's in, so it doesn't matter whether you plead innocent or guilty. If you plead guilty, you're going to get lesser a lesser sentence. Often that's a lie too. And it's so extended over such a period of time, the pressure builds and it's unrelenting, and people crack, and they do it all the time. Innocent people plead guilty all the time. Great credit to the man who took an extra 10 years to stand for the truth and stand for the fact that he was innocent. And this brings us full circle to where we started. How do you know if you can trust someone if they're telling the truth? Well, if the truth is costing them and they keep saying it, they're probably telling the truth.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think that's true. I think that extrapolates backwards, even to the point of litigation. So the reason I lost my house was because I had to go down a form of bankruptcy proceedings known as an IVA, an individual voluntary arrangement. I've never owed anyone a penny in my life. I've never even owned a credit card because I don't actually like debt. It's something that I wasn't brought up with. And so when I tweeted about someone in error, I made a mistake. I accused someone of something they didn't do. I retracted, I apologized, I deleted the rest of it. But they wanted £5,000 for a migrant charity, which, because of my beliefs and because of what I know, I wasn't prepared to give. That to me is extortion. So I wasn't prepared to do that. When this case got brought to the High Court, and you can imagine the kinds of organizations who were helping to fund that in order to bring me down, I had to, everyone was, well, you must settle. £30,000 it was by then. Just settle, just give her the money, £30,000. Doesn't matter, just give it to her. And it was like, well, I could give her £30,000, but we're now going to have case law where if you perceive you've been seriously harmed, you don't have to prove harm, you can sue someone. And that is now law. And I was willing to take it all the way to the High Court, even though I don't believe in the law anymore, even though I don't believe in judges, even though I don't believe it's just one man's interpretation, usually, associated with the matrix or the government or whatever you call them. But it mattered to me that you should not have to settle the perceived serious harm. And that is libel law in the country now. And it cost me my house, because once the case was found in the other lady's favor, which everybody thought it would be with new law, it meant that the very next day, everybody I had ever exposed or written about or investigated or proved in the Daily Mail or LBC they'd done wrong, they came for me. So there was a row of court cases lined up like buses, each wanting £30,000. So that's the reality, is how far will you go? And honestly, I don't blame people. You never know until you're tested. And in some ways, actually, I feel like the vaccine was that test. Oh, but I really needed to go to that wedding. Oh, but I really needed to go on holiday. And no criticism particularly, just self-preservation is a very powerful tool that is used against us and will be again.
Katie, I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you today. I want to thank you very much for joining us and for being so candid and so funny. And until next time, and I do hope there'll be a next time, because we've got a lot more to talk about. Till next time, goodbye.